Hey, good afternoon. Good afternoon, Eva.
Good afternoon, Professor. How are you?
Hello. Good, how are you? I see only one person, only you. But before I came to the collaborate session, um, I checked. I just looked into the discussion board, and oops, what's going on? Am I not sharing? And at least I had three people there. All right. Let me go back. Let me go back and check. Yeah, at least it says six people. All right. I mean, five, except myself. Where's the rest of everybody? I see. Okay, I see three people joining. I mean, two people already in, one person joining. Okay. Still, I mean, this is very um, why is I think it is Thursday because it's Thursday afternoon. I don't know why. On Thursday afternoon, the attendance is kind of slow, very low. But anyway, regardless of how many people we have, uh, let me go on. So in our last class, um, I think we finished. Uh, uh, we talked about current liabilities, right? Uh, we talked about, what are the accruals, right? Accruals, or um, but that pretty much wraps up everything about the balance sheet because we talked about, capital structure. We talked about uh, the fixed assets, right? Plant and equipment, and we talked about the current assets. And what we need to focus more on, what we focused on mostly was uh, factoring. In other words, how the promissory notes and accounts receivable are um, liquidated in the money market, so that it will uh, free up the cash flow uh, of the company, right? And then current liabilities. So finally, we need to talk about we'll need to talk about the return. What is return? What is meant by return? What is return for a from the company's perspective, right? Um, remember, return. We started out this semester with return on investment because that's a very important concept in finance because that's what you are um, why you are in finance. That's why you are in finance. You want to maximize return. And return means return on investment, but it means rate of return, right? Rate of return. And we calculated what that is, how we calculate the rate of return. Well, basically, to understand that, we had to look into the concept of holding period return because, return means basically, rate of return, and holding period return is basically defined as PT plus N minus PT. So the holding period, that means holding period is N period or N years. Okay, that just means, holding period is something like N years. During those N years, right, how much the price has increased, plus the sum of all the cash flows in the meantime, right? And then, divided by the initial investment. And this term is called, capital gains. We already know, we understand. Basically, change in the price of the asset, that's called capital gains, right? And the additional cash flow is called income, right? Now, from the company's perspective, right? From the firm's perspective, how do they measure return on investment? Well, they can measure return by a number of measures, a number of ratios, measures. First thing is return on equity. Second, return on capital. Third, return on assets. And then fourth, return on sales. Now, but there are several measures, but we're not going to look at these two. I mean, the concepts are pretty much similar, but we're not gonna we don't have time to look at everything, so we're gonna look into only the two major ratio variables, two major and two most representative measures of profitability. Okay. Now, so I'm talking about, I just talked about, measure of profitability. Actually, these they are ratios. Why? First of all, return on equity is the ratio between EAT, earnings after taxes, at time 1 over equity at time 0. Okay, and then return on assets, return on total assets, it's EBIT, earnings before interest and taxes at time 1, over total assets at time 0. Okay. Now, if you think about it, these are clearly, there's no other way to put it. They are ratios, and typically these ratios are a typical example of input to output ratio. So what is input to output ratio? Output to input ratio, I mean, to be more specific, right? To be more what's output to input ratio, right? An output to input ratio is a very straightforward concept. You divide the output by input, and what else can do a better job to gauge the efficiency or the productivity of something, right? And it can be, there can be no dispute. There can be no dispute about it. Then, when you take the ratio between the output and input, and the fact that that's the way to measure the efficiency or productivity, there can be no dispute about it, right? Why? So if you think about it, let's take one good example. One good example, right? Example of output to input ratio is gas mileage, right? And gas mileage is, how do you calculate gas mileage? It's, it's very simple and everybody can easily understand. For example, if you have a car and your car's fuel tank capacity is 20 gallons, right? You fill the tank, right? Fill up the tank and drive until you run out of gas. And then at point, how many miles have you covered? And if you have covered 600 miles on 20-gallon tank, what's going on? Right? And we can easily tell right, 600 miles on 20-gallon tank, that's 30 miles per gallon. Isn't that right? 30 miles per gallon. And I don't think, there's even a sixth grader can understand this, right? But then this result is basically a measure of how efficient your car is. That's another reason why it's called fuel efficiency or fuel economy, right? Gas mileage means, basically fuel economy or fuel efficiency. And then there's 20 gallons. That's what? That's input. Isn't that right? On that input, how many miles have you got? That's output. Isn't that right? That's why it's, output to input ratio. And
so the input is the 20 gallons?
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, this car got 600 miles, which is the output, on 20 gallons, which was the input, right? But think about it. What else can, how else can you measure the productivity or the efficiency of the car, right? It's indisputable, right? And straightforward. The logic is very solid. Nothing else, right? Nothing else can beat this kind of, no matter what, how they, with very colorful words, how they may, come up with the definition of, gas mileage, all that is nothing but BS. Isn't that right? Huh?
Yes.
That's why, sorry sorry for that expression, BS, but no. So let me put it in a better way. Bovine fecal matter, right? Bovine fecal matter. Why? uh, I'm not a big fan of, I'm not a big fan of literature because literature, I mean, uh, there's great literature like, Tolstoy, there's great literature that really, but the great literature has intricate structure it's a very intricate structure and so many characters that are, portrayed and depicted in that uh, great masterpiece, and everything has, there's nothing that is loosely, uh, nothing that is loosely uh, produced in that. Every character, there are 1,000 characters. They all fit into places, and they are all intricately related to the main character one way or the other, or at least it plays a role in the plot. There is a great literature like Leo Tolstoy, or but out of all the literatures, except for that 1%, great masterpiece, the rest of them are, um, I would say, bovine fecal matter, because they are just bunch of words. They are just being very wordy, use colorful words, but nothing is, concrete. Nothing is, there's nothing closed-ended, nothing concise, terse, crisp, crisp. Uh, I want everything to be crisp, but people who write, um, except for that 1% masterpiece, it's really not very well written, or not crisp, no, and not concise, right? Um, so it's very inefficient. In other words, if you define fuel efficiency or fuel economy or gas mileage, how would you define it? If you define it by words, it would take at least a couple of paragraphs. That's not concise. That's not crisp. That's not right. That's not efficient. But output, miles run divided by output, which is the miles run divided by input, which is gallons, right? Uh, Gallons used. A very simple, crisp and concise expression, and it captures, the idea very, well. Now, yeah, gas mileage is a good example of output to input ratio. Now, when we say mileage, people also use that as a metaphor. In other words, people use it as, in figurative way, figurative, right? It's not just, when they say mileage, you get the best. For example, you have like, a couple of options, like 3 options, 4 options, when you're buying, something. And then they say, okay, out of all these options, option 1, 2, 3, and 4, option 3 gives you the best mileage. And what does that mean? We understand that it's not necessarily about the car, right? But when they say it gets you the best mileage, that means that gives you the most bang for the buck, right? Another expression is most bang for the buck, or most value for the money, most value for money, right? But if you think about it, most bang for the buck. That means most output for input, right? Or most value for money. The same thing, the same concept, right? So they all mean output to input ratio, and then we understand. Oh, so this is basically output to input ratio. Why? Think about it. Net EAT is, in other words, net profit, right? And then equity is, so net profit is the output. Yeah, that makes sense because, eventually net profit is the output of the operation of the company, right? But then what was the input? Actually, if you think about it, there are two types of uh, inputs are actually total assets, right? Why is total assets input? Now think about it. Didn't I say the total assets are when we define total assets, when we define assets, how is it defined? Is an asset something that generates income? Didn't we define it? Didn't we define it like that? Hmm? We defined asset as something that generates income. I mean, asset must have income generating capability, right? So, and if you go back to the example, our example was a uh, manufacturing business, making something like a computer, right? So let's see, manufacturing, how many people? I still have only 6 people. What's going on? I should give, for people that really, have, well, anyway, if you miss classes, then it piles up, if you don't, um, at least, there are like 8 people, 8 people. Uh, but there are like how many people in this class? There are at least like on the roster, at least by the roster, there's like 20 people, or let me quickly check. By the roster, 21 people. And of course, of those 21 people, um, some people that have more than 6 absences, and chances are some people have never attended. 14 absence, 13 absence, that means they have never attended. So, well, if those people that have never attended or very extensive absences, most likely they're not going to return, and then uh, and there's no way, if you have extensive absence, there's no way uh, you can do well in the exam, and then there's no way. I mean the attendance and participation points, and you've seen the effect. There is a big difference, the attendance and participation points can swing swing the direction of your grade. But anyway, in our the example was that we are running a computer manufacturing business, and the total assets are, first of all, we know the total assets, which come from debt and equity, right? Total assets come from debt and equity, right? And then most of these total assets was, fixed assets. In other words, most of these assets were uh, not current assets or liquid assets, but most of it was fixed assets, right? meaning plant and equipment. And the plant and equipment, because it's a manufacturer, right? Manufacturing business, it is inevitable. You will need a huge plant and equipment. I mean, when I say huge, I mean that means in proportion, right? In proportion, right? Out of total assets, almost. Our example was almost 95% of the total assets was plant and equipment, right? Almost 95. So out of $10 million total assets, 9.5 million was plant and equipment, right? Um, and let's say our example wasn't exactly that way, but let's say if equity was 70% of that, and debt, so in other words, they raised that capital, $10 million capital, right? If the total asset was $10 million, they raised 70% of that came from equity, right? 30% of that came from debt. So in other words, the capital structure, this is called capital structure, right? 30% debt, 70% equity, right? So that means the total assets was of course asset basically is asset comes from debt and equity, right? And 70% of those assets came from equity, 30% came from debt, right? That's what it means. Now then, excuse me. Just, it suddenly, got very warm since like yesterday. I had to open the window. Where was I? Then think about it. Almost, in manufacturing, right? Almost, all of the, in this case, 95%, uh, almost 95% of total assets is physical capital, right? And capital is means of production, right? Capital is means of production. So is the fixed assets. I mean, assets must generate income, right? So then, I may have mentioned this before. Uh, a company is nothing but a vessel, isn't that right? Everyone understands. Company is, why does the company exist? The whole reason for being, whole reason for the company's being, whole reason for the firm's being, right? The whole reason for the company's existence, firm's existence, is to serve as a vessel. Vessel. It's a vessel. Company is a vessel, right? A firm is um, a firm is a vessel, right? For what? To do what? To channel the profit to the owners, right? It's a vessel to channel or funnel the profit to the um, owners, right? So, um, you might wonder, there must be other, there must be other, purposes of, the firm, uh, something like, to serve the community, blah blah. Yeah, that could be, like secondary, I mean, uh, but those are, you know, there is no for profit, there is no for profit uh, organization, right? There is no such thing as a for-profit organization that has the primary, that has the service to the community as, or service to the human race as its primary goal, right? It's just a cover. I mean, behind all that cover, right? If you take off that cover, uh, the primary goal of all businesses is to maximize profit, or to maximize shareholder value, shareholder wealth, or shareholder value, right? That's why they are for profit businesses, right? Maximizing profit means, is the same thing as maximizing uh, shareholder value. And that's the whole, of course, some companies, I mean, depending on uh, what they do, I mean, of course, they create some, they create um, the goods and services that have, value to the consumers, right? Of course, Apple makes phone, so does Samsung. All those phones, that technology, right? Um, there must be, great sense of achievement when an organization, business organization, uh, creates technology, develops technology, and on, uh, stay on top of the game, being the number one leader in the market. Excuse me, I have to take this call. I'm gonna have to take this call. Hello? Yeah, I'm in the middle of the class, so can I'll put the class on. I'll put the class on hold for. Give me a second. I'll put the class on hold for a while. Just where is that? Okay. I'll, excuse me. I'll put you on a hold just for about minutes. Okay. look, I okay, I will do that. Um, okay, there are two things, Okay, so that there are two things. One, this course, we cannot take it by e-permit because there's no equivalent course. Two, if it is the case, then the students, uh, it will have to be free for the students, for our students, because otherwise, they otherwise then where is that thing? Um, yeah. Okay, I will do. No, I have already posted an announcement about that to all my students, and I've asked Chanel to. Uh, okay. If e-permit is not the thing, then that's fine. I mean, if as long as this course is offered for free, then that's but there's no. I'm trying to look in. I'm trying to read this and in this flyer, and there's nothing in the flyer that says this is uh, offered for free. So I will ask that to Ashif. And this is the problem. I mean, Ashif is he must be sending you email to you, not and it's because he must be he thinks somehow he needs to speak to the chair only. He probably thinks I sent him an email already, but he thinks he's it's not from the chair, so he's just simply well, whatever he thinks, um, and I clearly mentioned that I was the party that spoke with the Dean Foster. I'm the counterpart to Kevin Foster, and if he's simply disregarding it, and yeah, I will do that. I will do that. All righty, you're welcome. All righty, bye bye. All righty. All righty. Sorry about that. It took a little longer. That was my department chair, and I don't know if you have noticed, but I just posted something in the announcements today. Santander Fellowship, and the Santander Fellowship, please read that. Not everyone would be eligible for that, but if you are a finance major, and if you are, if you're bright and good, and first you will have to take their Eco 21650. You are I don't know if you're in your first year or second year. If you're in second year and if you're a finance major, this will be a good opportunity. And the flyer is here. I mean, it was attached. I mean, the Blackboard is a very complete self-contained system, and if you just follow the instruction, I mean, the instruction it's everywhere. The announcement has the link to the announcement itself has the link to, right? I don't know why people don't read. Generally people don't read. A lot of students don't read these days. They just think, whatever is long, 2 paragraphs. They don't read 2 paragraphs, and they don't read carefully. They don't read thoroughly. if you read thoroughly and carefully, and you will notice at the end there is a link, and if you click on that, it will download this flyer. So anyway, please, check it out later. Um, okay, what was I? So the firm is a vessel, and as a vessel, its goal is to maximize the shareholder wealth. To maximize, basically, the firm channels the profit to shareholders, the owners, and um, the the profit will depend on the revenue, right? The bigger the revenue, the bigger the profit, and the revenue depends on the size of the revenue depends on the size of the firm, and the size of the firm is defined by the total assets. Think about it. Total assets and the majority of the total assets is the majority of the total assets is plant and equipment, right? The physical assets, right? Which uh, is the means of production, right? And so the size of the size of the firm is defined by the size of the total assets. The size of the total assets is defined by the mainly by the fixed assets, right? Plant and equipment for manufacturers. I'm not talking about the retail. I'm talking about the manufacturer. And if the manufacturer, so for the manufacturer, um, uh, for the manufacturer, um, the I said, size of the total assets defines the size of the company. Why? Because total assets uh, defines the output capacity, right? Does that make sense? The total assets defines the size of the output capacity, because if 95% of the total assets is the fixed assets, the plant and equipment, size of the plant and equipment defines the output capacity. Isn't that right? For example, with the $10 million, right? If the you can build a plant and equipment that can be built by $10 million, and what $10 million can build will have clearly a limitation, right? In other words, in output capacity, production capacity. So a $10 million plant and equipment can, let's say, produce 10,000 computers per month. But then if you have $100 million plant, if you have $100 million plant and equipment, your production capacity would be roughly, I mean, it may not be exactly linearly proportional. It may not be linearly proportional, but if you have $100 million plant and equipment, the production capacity would be 10 times that, right? Isn't that right? Does that make sense? Hmm? I have only like
Yes, it makes sense.
yeah, okay, great, Ava. So at least, logically, it's a logic, and you're logically following, right? Um, yeah. So uh, the output capacity or the production capacity also determines the revenue, because if you produce, with $10 million plant and equipment, you produce, um, uh, you know, uh, uh, 10,000 computers a month, but with $100 million plant, you will produce and sell 10 times that. So like 100,000 computers a month, and 100,000 computers would bring in the revenue. I mean, if each computer is $300, then 100,000 times 300 will be like $30 million. That will be the revenue. And then the bigger the revenue, the bigger the output capacity, the bigger the sales, the bigger the sales, the bigger the sales revenue, the bigger the sales revenue, the bigger market share. The bigger the market share, this company will take up the bigger market share in the market, right? Um, Also, profit will also be proportionally greater. And also think about it. There is a good reason why the industry giants, I mean, the biggest firm is always the biggest firm in the industry is always the number one player in the industry, because the biggest firm has the biggest market share. They all want to become the biggest player in the market, because the biggest firm um, has the biggest production capacity, and the biggest production capacity means biggest revenue, which also means biggest market share. They all want to become, so that's why they all want to become number one player in the market. Of course, the number one player in the market want they don't want to get threatened, right? I mean, if there's a competition which is challenging their position, they don't like it. So they want to kill off potential competition. That's the reality, right? Um, that's the reality, because the market is limited, and if I lose 1% of the, if one small competition is gaining 1% market share, that means someone is losing 1% market share, right? And if I'm the biggest player, and if the my competitor is gaining 1%, which means I'm losing 1% of market share, I don't want to. I'm not gonna just watch it with hands down, right? I won't be just watching it, doing nothing. So what would I do? If it is a small company that is gaining 1% market share, I will try to kill it off, right? Before it becomes bigger. That's the reality. It's a war, right? Um, how do you kill it off? Usually, if it's a small company, you can buy out. You can buy out, the existing owners, right? But okay, so that means so we came a kind of long way, but the point is, um, you understand why return on asset has, you see, this is output to input ratio. I've been telling you, right? And we understand why this is output, right? If it is output. And is this input? It doesn't look like input. I mean, input is like gas. Gas is used up in producing the output, but total asset isn't like gas. It's actually more like the car. Yes, it's a good. It's more like the car, not the gas. But still, it's like your muscle, right? If you are 200 pounds, if you weigh 200 pounds and full of muscle, I mean, what is the purpose of muscle? To make you look good? No, actually, from physics, scientific point of view, right? In physics, work is the result of, how is the work defined? Work is defined by, let's say there's 1 ton weight, and if that 1 ton weight is moved from point A to point B, that's the work. Work is done. So to move that 1 ton weight from point A to point B, right? Uh, Force must be applied, right? Force must be applied. And what generates, what produces force? Of course, it's your muscle. Muscle will, or horsepower will be generated by your muscle or by machine. So still the same thing. If you're like 200 pounds, if you're 6'2", 200 pounds, there are two people, let's say two people, both of them are, physically the same, 6'2", let's just say 6 foot, even 6 foot you can be tall. Both of them 6 foot tall, uh, and 200 pounds, both of them. But one guy is 200 pounds full of muscle, the other guy is 200 pounds full of fat. Now, which guy will be moving more, if better at moving that 1 ton weight from point A to point B? Obviously, the guy with more muscles, right? The guy with 200 pounds of fat won't be able to move anything. So we're the body, the body is like the plant. It's like the total assets, right? So it's the ratio of like output to input, but rather than output to input, output to the vessel, or the okay, output to vessel ratio. But it's still the same thing. It can be considered also input. It's not used up, but you have to use the muscle to move a 1 ton weight from point A to point B. Now, and also I can compare this to a fruit tree. Now, suppose you have a tree, a fruit tree, right? And it's not owned by only you. There are uh, there are 10 owners of this tree. 10, collectively owned, right, by 10 owners. So it's like shareholders, right? If the tree is this is a $10 million tree, $10 million tree, and owned by 10 shareholders. And the shareholders, this tree was bought 30% by debt and 70% by equity. So that means $7 million was raised from these shareholders, 10 shareholders, and 3 million was financed by debt. Okay. And what is the purpose of the tree? The tree will have to bear fruit. So you bought the tree at time zero. You bought the tree at time zero, right? You bought the tree at time zero, right? So the total assets is like the tree, right? This total assets is like the tree you bought at time zero. And at time one, the tree will bear fruit. The tree will bear fruit. That's like the fruit, right? And it bears 2 million fruit, 2 million fruit, right? And each fruit is $1. So the harvest, right? The output of at the harvest, 1 year later, the output of the tree is $2 million. Okay. So then that's what return on assets is. The 2 million over 10 million, right? That's like 20%, right? And that 2 million, right? Let's say that is, Oh, it's not moving. Okay. Oh, moved too much. And where is it possibly? Yeah. So 2 million is EBIT or operating profit, and 10 million is the total assets. Your total assets is the tree. But think about it. If you are the shareholder from the shareholder's perspective or the equity holder's perspective, right? Um, uh, 2 million doesn't entirely belong to you. 2 million doesn't belong to you entirely. Why? Because your share in this total equity in this total um, equity in this total assets is only 7 million, right? And then because 30%, this 2 million, right? The fruit, you owe 30% of that fruit to debt holders because 30% came from debt, right? So this 2 million doesn't belong entirely to you. So that's why this is EBIT. It's earnings before interest and taxes. So you have to pay interest. You have to pay interest, and you have to pay taxes. So if you pay interest and taxes, then it is, let's say, 1 million. After paying interest and taxes, it's 1 million. Okay, that 1 million is earnings after taxes, or exactly net profit. And then net profit belongs solely to the owners or the shareholders. So that's what return on equity is, right? That's what the return on equity is. Return on equity is basically a measure of uh, uh, the net profit, right? Out of measure of the ratio between net profit and the equity. Uh, so this is basically measuring the productivity of my equity, productivity or the um, productivity or profitability of the equity, right? So by investing $7 million, how much did we get? And the return in that case will be simply, if I divide by, uh, we can easily, using the calculator, 1/7, right? There'll be 14.28%, so almost 14.3%. It'll be 14.3%, right? Um, that's the gas mileage. That's the mileage of my equity, right? But of course, in this example, interest and taxes, almost 50% of this EBIT, that's kind of too much. But let's say, just to make it simple, I made it like that. But we know this is 20%, right? 20% is the return on total assets, which measures the productivity of the total assets. This is the productivity, return on equity measures the productivity of the equity, right? Uh, because from the equity holders' perspective, the equity holders would want to know how profitable or how productive um, my equity was. In other words, my investment was. but from this is for mainly, I mean, both equity holders and debt holders can look at this to gauge the overall profitability of the company, but it serves uh, debt holders. It serves debt holders more because from the debt holders' perspective, there's no way to gauge the profitability from their, of their debt from return on equity. They will have to measure it by this. Of course, you might wonder that can they not do, uh, uh, can they not measure uh, simply, like 2 million by 3 million, because that is the size of the debt. Well, then, no. This is, basically EBIT over debt, right? But then think about it. This is uh, this is, uh, far-fetched. This is quite far-fetched. This is far-fetched. Why? Um, because this kind of operating profit isn't possible by debt only. Isn't that right? First of all, debt was only like 30% of the total assets. So this is the result of the total assets. This is the output of the total assets, right? The fruit borne by total assets. And simply measuring, simply taking the ratio between EBIT and debt is meaningless because this could not have been possible with only $3 million in the think about it. This result cannot be possible. I mean, this result, $2 million, is the result of $10 million total assets, $10 million firm with a $10 million equipment, plant and equipment, with the production capacity supported by the $10 million plant and equipment. So if the plant size was 3 million, uh, you couldn't have gotten that 2 million as the output, right? Makes sense? This type of ratio doesn't exist because it's pointless, it's irrelevant. But the whole idea behind oh no, wait. The whole idea behind return on assets and return on equity is pretty well captured in the tree analogy I gave you. Tree analogy. Tree is the farm. Tree is the total assets. Tree is mainly, and 95% of the tree is plant and equipment. So the tree will bear fruit. The fruit belongs to whom? I mean, some of it belongs to the um, uh, uh, some of it belongs to the debt holders as interest payment, and some of it belongs to the government. But after subtracting all that, what remains? The 1 million fruit that remains after paying taxes and paying interest, that belongs to the uh, shareholders. So hence, return on equity and return on assets. All righty. So that's the that wraps up everything about topic 2. Okay. So we're not going to be dwelling on topic 2 anymore. That wraps up everything. So from next class, we'll be into topic 3. Okay? Actually, topic 3 is over as of today by main lecture. If you go to uh, the main, going by the main lecture today, actually, not, okay, today these are, and then next Monday, October 26th, this is going to be the last thing. So we are almost done with, the topic 3 by the main lecture. All right, so that's it for today. Any questions? Any questions so far? Any questions? All righty, if you don't have any more questions, then have a great afternoon. I'll stop sharing and stop recording and sign out. Take care, everyone. Anyone? Is there anyone? All righty, signing out.